So what I want to do is demonstrate some projects from the incident response class, which is closely related to this class. And this is Velociraptor. So these 5 projects at the bottom, all extra credit in this class, are the ones you can do if you want to. And in order to do this, you need to have Windows and Linux machine. Now you've already got a Windows machine that you're running Autopsy on, and you'll need a Linux machine to do this. So first I'll just talk about this one briefly. You can run them locally with Debian on a local machine and Windows 10 on a local machine, or you could put them in the Azure cloud or in the Google cloud, but you end up with there's instructions here to guide you through it. In fact, I think for Debian, you're just downloading a pre-built Debian machine from Linux Images, and for our Windows machine, we're just getting a pre-built Windows machine, either the one I made for my malware analysis class, or just one from Microsoft that's pre-built. So in both cases, it's just a matter of downloading something, unzipping it, and running it in a virtualization software, or just going to a cloud service and creating it on the cloud service using your free student trial money. So that's the first thing you have to do, is get those machines. And when you've got them, you can then set up a Velociraptor server. And I'll demonstrate this and show you what it looks like. Let me get mine up here. Here we go. I've got Debian 11 for the server, and I've got a Windows machine as the client. All right, so let me shove this thing out of the way. All right, let's start with the Linux machine. This is the console. Let's see, it's not moving yet. There we go. This is the console of my Debian Linux machine. And yes, you could use the Shift workstation as a Linux machine if you want. That's true. Really, pretty much any Linux distribution would work, I suppose, although I'm not sure if it would run then Kali's another one. You can try it. It might not run Velociraptor well. Kali messed up a lot of things, but it might work. Try it and see. Now in this case, I used a headless Debian server, which may not be the most popular solution, but that's what I did. And when you're communicating with that, it's a whole lot easier to use SSH than to use to type directly into the console. So what you do is you connect. All you need is the IP address of your machine and the name and password. And I should have a terminal somewhere. Ah, here it comes. All right. So I know the IP address of my machine, and let me turn up my cooler here a little bit. My machines start to act a little funny, and when I'm running virtual machines and streaming, it gets sort of busy and hot. All right, so you SSH in with your username at the IP address of your machine, and all right, something must be wrong with that IP address. Let's see. If I do IP address, now it's 172.16, 123.130. Oh, I just typed it in wrong. Whoa, whoa. There we go. All right, 123. That's what you should see. That's the window that introduces you to your cloud Debian machine. All right, so what I did was I made a folder to work in, 152, and now I end up with a folder called Velociraptor here, which is the product, and let me just show you how you set it up. I don't think I'll do this part live because it's pretty straightforward. If you go to the website, you can see Velociraptor, and here there is a little bit of a gotcha. Velociraptor is an open source product and available on GitHub, but you see it's up to 0.6.7, release candidate 1. And our original instructions said use the latest version, but I discovered that the latest version is kind of messed up. They've changed how you put in regular expressions for paths, and as far as I can tell, they've broken them, although it's possible that they've just made them too complicated for me to understand. But anyway, the older version, when I prepared these instructions about a year ago, is the one to use. So don't bother with the latest version, just use the one mentioned here, 0.6.0-1. That one works fine. And the latest one is kind of messed up as far as I can tell. So you just execute these commands. You use wget to download the executable. It's just a pre-built, pre-compiled executable for Linux. It also has versions for Windows, and we'll need both versions eventually. But first you just download that one and run it. You generate a configuration file, and then you edit the configuration file to have your IP address of your machine instead of listening only on localhost. This is a very common thing many security products do. They run a server and then they listen only on the localhost address, so you can only access them from a browser on that one machine. This is a more secure arrangement, but less convenient. So to prevent that, we listen on the public address, and I'll show you that. So here's the command that runs the Velociraptor server. I'll just copy and paste it. So I have to move into that Velociraptor directory, and if I do an ls in here, you'll see I have a Linux executable here. And I'm just going to run that with the configuration file that I created in the earlier steps, and frontend -v will run the front end to give us a graphical environment and be verbose about it, so we will see messages here go by. So there's the Velociraptor banner, and now it tells you it's ready to listen for requests on that address. And I should have that open here. All right, I'll put it in. Let me copy it out of here. There's the address I need, ending in port 8889, and I paste that into my browser. All right. And it asks me for a name and password, which I specified when installing the server. You'll see it in the instructions. And then you have this glorious thing called Velociraptor with the cute little animal. And this shows that your Velociraptor server is running, and you can do things like inspect the server state to see how many connected clients there are, but that's not the most interesting thing to do. And if you go show all, you'll see the clients, and we're going to have one Windows client. So let me go back to the instructions and talk about how you get that Windows client, because it's no fun unless you get your Windows client. So once you've got your Velociraptor server set up, then to make your Windows client, you create a you edit the server configuration file. Your Velociraptor server is listening on a public address which can reach the other machine. Now, in order for this to work, the purpose of this product is for forensic investigation and incident response. So it lets you ask questions from the server, like, is this indicator of compromise on any Windows machine in my fleet? And it will then send requests to all the Windows machines in your enterprise and get data back from them showing whether certain indicators of compromise are found on them. But in order to do that, it has to have an agent running on the Windows machine to take those commands. And that is the same executable as the one used for the server. It's very convenient, but you do have to get the Windows version. The problem is, I don't have a real company set up with a real public server certificate for HTTPS. So my Velociraptor server is listening. Here, the protocol is HTTPS. But notice this warning, not secure. It's using a self-signed certificate. So you'll be warned when you open this page that it's not really as secure as a real HTTPS certificate. And the agents on the Windows machine will be communicating back to the Linux server, and they will observe the same thing. And by default, they will refuse to connect and pop up a box saying, this is not a secure connection. So to avoid that, I have to put this line in the configuration file, use self-signed SSL, to tell them to connect without complaining, even though I'm using a self-signed certificate. And this is something you might want to avoid when setting this up on a real company network, but in our test networks, that's how we're doing it. So you may do that, and to create the Windows client installer, you download the Windows version of the Velociraptor executable, and then you could install it, but you'd have to install a server executable and a configuration file on the Windows machine, and it's easier if you repack it. This creates a repackaged Velociraptor which contains the executable file right in the configuration right inside it. So what you've got here is essentially what malware is, although this is intended to be used for legitimate company monitoring, but that's what malware is. You run an executable, and inside the executable, it tells it the address of the command and control server. It phones home to the command and control server. So that's what this product does. And now you just have to get this executable to the Windows machine, and there are various ways to do it, but the way I chose to do it, which seems pretty general, is to just use a Windows SCP client, which can download it from the Linux server over SSH. So you just log into your Linux server with its address, and then you can find the repackaged Velociraptor and drag it down to the documents or desktop or somewhere on the Windows server. And then you run it in an administrator command prompt. You run the Windows executable service install. And so let's take a look at that. I've got, I already showed you my Velociraptor server is connected to a Windows machine with this blue link here. And my Windows machine, if you look at its desktop here, having a little trouble dragging it around. All right, here's my Windows machine, and it's being a little slow and laggy on me, which is what I was sort of afraid of when I run these virtual machines. All right, I may not be able to reasonably show you anything on the desktop of this Windows machine. Okay, my mouse is going to be like that. It's not going to work. I'll just work elsewhere. Anyway, the point is it's running a service in the background connecting here. And you can observe information on the Windows machine here. This will take you to your Windows machine, and you can go to the virtual file system. This is one way to use Velociraptor, and you can now see files on there. So if you go to NTFS, for example, it will show you there's no data available, but you can refresh it up here. And then it'll show you there's a drive named C. So you can go to the drive named C and refresh that. You'll see the folders on the drive named C. And so you've got, these are, by the way, the NTFS volume that are used to store the metadata about files. There's the master file table, which lists all the owners and timestamps and permissions. There's the recycle bin. The ones that start with dollars are not normally shown in the Windows graphical interface. And here you get the ones that are in the interface, like a file called bginfo and documents and settings, folders and such. Anyway, these are your Windows files, and you can also view the registry directly here. You open the registry, refresh it, and you'll see the top layer of this, HKey classes root, HKey current config, and so on. And you could browse it through this way, but I've never really used that. That is the hard way to find evidence. The fun way to find evidence is to go to, let me get back to the main page with show all here. Fun way to find evidence is this, collected. Now you can choose, for example, if you want to see the network connections on that machine, you can just hit plus, and now you can choose from a list of pre-populated artifacts, which are wonderful. So if I want to do netstat, this is all I've ever needed to do, is just use these pre-populated artifacts. They're very good. So this is netstat. This will show information about open sockets. You might find parameters you can adjust for it here, and there are no parameters for this one. So you can just launch it. Then you select it in the top pane, and down here you can go to the log and see how it works. It did the collection in just 1.3 seconds, and here's the results. And this is just the results of all the listening sockets on the and open connections on the Windows machine. And for example, there's various services listening, but if I go, let me just make it so it all fits on one page here. If I go down here, I should be able to find my connection to the Velociraptor server here. This is the local address port. There's the remote address port, and the remote address should be 8000. There it is. There's the connection to my Velociraptor server on port 8000, and you can see it is the Velociraptor executable connecting from my Windows machine to my Linux machine on port 8000. So that's why this is wonderful, and that's why I like to include it in a forensics class, because you're getting the same kind of evidence you get from the forensic examination. The only difference is you're getting it from running on a live system, and this is primarily intended for instant response, but you can use it for any other forensic investigation as well. So let me stop this recording.